I want you to picture a high-stakes poker game. You've been at the table for days. The room's full of smoke, your eyes are stinging, and your stack of chips is just slowly, inevitably dwindling.
Hmm.
And you look across the table, and your opponent, the Allies, they have a seemingly infinite supply of cash, with like absolute mathematical certainty that if you keep playing conservative standard poker, you are going to lose.
Would be ground down.
You will be ground down. So what do? You look at your hand, it's not great, and you decide to shove every single chip you have into the middle. You go all in.
Yeah.
You know it's reckless. You know it might just blow up in your face immediately. But the alternative, well, that's a slow death.
That is the perfect analogy for where the German Empire stood in January 1917. They're looking at the map, they're looking at supply lines, and realizing that the status quo was a death sentence.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We are tackling 1917 today. And if you look at the history books, 1917, it often feels like the year everything just goes off the rails.
It really is. This is the year where the First World War stops being just a contest of armies on a battlefield. It shifts into something much darker, more desperate.
How so?
It becomes a race against economic collapse, social revolution, and, literal starvation.
It's the year of the gamble. I was looking at the timeline we pulled together, and it's honestly shocking. You have superpowers dissolving, new ones entering the chat, and military commanders just rolling the dice on strategies that, well, they seem insane in hindsight.
They seem insane to us now, but that's the key context. By late 1916, the war had become a stalemate of attrition. Germany had won plenty of battles, but they were losing the war of resources.
A British blockade.
The British blockade was strangling them. The German high command did the math and realized they couldn't win a long war. They had to end it fast.
So let's look at their first big roll of the dice.
Yeah.
The water. Germany decides to resume unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, for anyone who thinks that just means using submarines, it's a lot more specific, isn't it?
Oh, much more specific. Before this, there were rules, sort of cruiser rules, where you'd warn a merchant ship before sinking it, maybe let the crew get into lifeboats.
Right.
Unrestricted warfare meant the U-boats were unleashed. They could torpedo any ship, neutral or enemy, headed for Britain without any warning.
And the goal was just to starve Britain into submission.
Precisely. The German Admiralty calculated that if they could sink 600,000 tons of shipping a month, they could force Britain to surrender within 6 months.
They literally put a timer on the war.
They did.
But there's a massive variable in that equation. If you start sinking everything that floats, you're going to sink American ships.
Yep.
And the United States is currently sitting on the sidelines, very rich and very neutral.
And Germany knew this. That's why it was such a gamble. They predicted that restarting this campaign would almost certainly bring the United States into the war against them.
Which seems suicidal. Why provoke the industrial giant?
Because of the lag time. They were betting that they could starve Britain out before the Americans could mobilize an army and get it across the Atlantic.
So they thought, the U.S. creates an army, that takes a year, we can win in 6 months.
Exactly that. It's a terrifying calculus, and they didn't waste a second. 2 days into the campaign, a U-boat torpedoes the SS Housatonic,
An American steamer.
carrying wheat from Galveston to England. Exactly the kind of target they needed to destroy to starve the British, but also exactly the kind of target that would enrage the American public.
And yet, even sinking American ships wasn't enough for the German Foreign Office. They decided to pour gasoline on the fire with the Zimmermann telegram.
Oh, the telegram.
I mean, I've read the text of this thing, and I still have a hard time believing it was real.
It does read like bad fiction. You have Arthur Zimmermann, the German Foreign Secretary, sending an encoded message to Mexico.
And the proposal is basically, hey, Mexico, if we go to war with the U.S., why don't you attack them?
And in exchange, we'll help you take back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona.
It's absurd.
It sounds absurd, but from a German strategic perspective, it was about distraction. If the U.S. is busy fighting a border war with Mexico, they can't send millions of men to France.
Oh, Mexico taking back Texas.
Mexico naturally rejected it immediately. I mean, they didn't have the military power to fight the U.S., but the real damage was done when British intelligence intercepted the note.
And they just held on to it.
They waited for the perfect moment to release it to the Americans, and that was the tipping point.
So between the U-boats and this telegram literally carving up the American Southwest on paper, President Wilson had no choice.
He declares war. So on the surface, the German gamble failed. They brought the U.S. in. But, and this is crucial, the gamble almost worked.
Because of that lag time you mentioned.
Right. Wilson declares war, but the U.S. Army is tiny. It needs to draft, train, equip, and then ship millions of men. Meanwhile, the U-boats are having a field day. We have to talk about Bloody April.
The numbers are staggering. In April 1917 alone, U-boats sank 886,000 tons of shipping.
That's 17 ships a day.
17 a day.
It was a massacre. Britain has weeks of food left. They are rationing everything. The German prediction was coming true. Britain was buckling.
So how did they stop it? Because obviously Britain didn't starve.
They finally adopted the convoy system. For a long time, merchant ships sailed alone, which, made them easy pickings.
So simple. Just group them together.
Grouped them together, surrounded by destroyers. It was controversial at the time because the Admiralty thought it made ships a bigger target. But once they implemented it, the losses dropped off a cliff.
The U-boats just couldn't get close.
Not without being attacked by escorts. The gamble failed, but it came within inches of succeeding.
Okay, so while the Atlantic is in chaos, the Eastern Front Russia is undergoing a complete meltdown. This is the other major pivot of 1917.
This is where the human cost of the war just completely breaks a political system. Russia had suffered millions of casualties, the economy was shattered, you had bread riots in Petrograd.
And they just spiraled.
They turned into a full-scale revolution. The Tsar abdicates in March. And you'd think, okay, the Tsar is gone, the new government will see the people are starving and end the war.
It seems like the logical move.
It would have been, but the provisional government, which took over, made a fatal error. They decided to honor their alliances and keep fighting.
Why? I mean, if the soldiers are mutinying and the people are rioting, why stay in the fight?
There was immense pressure from the Allies and a belief that they could still defend Russia, but the army was done. When the government ordered the July offensive, it was a disaster.
It wasn't just a military loss.
No, it wasn't just that they lost the battle. The soldiers simply stopped following orders. You had mass desertions.
And this power vacuum opens the door for Lenin.
Enter the Bolsheviks, the October Revolution. Lenin promises peace, land, and bread. And unlike the provisional government, he delivers on the peace part immediately.
Russia signs an armistice.
They're out.
This changes the entire geometry of the war. The Eastern Front is just gone.
And for the Allies, this is a nightmare scenario. Germany had hundreds of thousands of troops tied up in the east fighting Russians. Suddenly, those troops are free.
They can all be put on trains and sent to France.
So the race is on. Can the Americans arrive in force before the Germans move their entire Eastern Army to the west? That is the ticking clock of 1917.
Let's look at the Western Front then. Because even before those German reinforcements arrive, the Allies are trying to break the stalemate. And again, we see this theme of high-stakes gambling.
It's a year of breakthrough attempts that just turn into tragedies. You have the Battle of Arras in the spring.
This includes Vimy Ridge, right? That's always highlighted as a big Canadian victory.
It was a significant tactical success. The Canadian Corps took a ridge that had been considered impregnable. They planned it meticulously. But in the context of the wider war,
The cost.
the Allies suffered 150,000 casualties during the Arras offensive. The Germans lost fewer. It didn't change the strategic map.
And then you have the French side, the Nivelle offensive. I was reading about General Nivelle, and he sounds like a man who believed his own hype.
He was charismatic, and he promised a formula for victory. He told the French government he could break the German line in 48 hours.
48 hours after 3 years of trench warfare. That's a bold claim.
It was a fantasy. The attack failed almost instantly. The Germans knew they were coming. The French troops were just mowed down. And this is where the gamble really broke the French army.
The mutinies.
Yes. It wasn't a mutiny in the sense of, shooting their officers and joining the Germans. It was more like a strike.
Really?
Soldiers in nearly half of the French division said, "We will defend the trenches. We will hold the line, but we will not go over the top to be slaughtered for nothing."
That is a fascinating distinction. It's a refusal of suicide, not a refusal of war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the French high command had to respond. They fired Nivelle. They brought in General Pétain, who was known as the soldiers' general, and he had to promise, no more suicidal attacks. We wait for the Americans and the tanks.
Speaking of tanks, we saw them at the Battle of Cambrai later in the year. This feels like a glimpse of the future.
It was November 1917, the first mass tank attack in history. Nearly 400 tanks rolling forward. They crushed the barbed wire, crossed the trenches, and they broke the German line.
It worked?
It worked for about 24 hours. But the technology was still in its infancy. The tanks broke down mechanically, they ran out of fuel, they got stuck.
And the infantry couldn't keep up.
Exactly. The Germans counterattacked a few days later and took back almost all the ground.
It's heartbreaking. You finally find the key to the lock, and it snaps off in your hand.
That's 1917 in a nutshell.
We can't talk about the Western Front in 1917 without mentioning Passchendaele. The name itself just sounds miserable.
The Third Battle of Ypres. This is possibly the lowest point of the British war effort. The plan was to punch through in Flanders. But before the attack, they unleashed a massive artillery bombardment.
Which just churned up the ground.
It destroyed the delicate drainage systems of the region. Flanders is naturally wet. When the shelling destroyed the drains, and then the autumn rain started.
The mud.
It wasn't just mud, it was a liquid swamp. Men drowned in it, horses drowned in it, rifles jammed. If you flipped off the duckboards, you could just vanish.
Unbelievable.
The British fought there for months, suffering 240,000 casualties, to advance a few miles into a cratered wasteland.
And earlier you mentioned that 1917 was a race. While the British are drowning in mud, what's happening in the skies? Because the air war really evolves this year, too.
It does. The plane stops being a novelty. You see the development of specific roles. Reconnaissance planes were directing artillery fire, making the guns much more deadly.
So the other side had to develop scout planes fighters to shoot them down.
Right, and we had Bloody April in the air, just like at sea. The Germans introduced better planes, like the Albatross, and for a while, the life expectancy of a new British pilot was measured in weeks.
Weeks.
The Allies eventually caught up with better tech, but the air became a genuine killing field.
I want to zoom out to the map again. We've talked about the West and the East, but the world part of World War I really expands here. Italy, for example.
Italy is often overlooked, but the disaster there in 1917 nearly lost the war for the Allies.
This is the Battle of Caporetto.
Remember those German troops freeing up from Russia? Some of them went to the Italian front to help the Austrians. They launched a surprise attack using new infiltration tactics.
And the Italian line just dissolved.
It shattered. The Italians retreated 70 miles. They lost 300,000 men, mostly prisoners. It was such a catastrophe that Britain and France had to rush divisions from the Western Front down to Italy.
Troops they couldn't spare.
Not at all. They had to send them just to stop the country from being knocked out of the war entirely.
So Russia is out, Italy is on the ropes, France is mutinying, the Allies are really hanging by a thread. Is there any good news for them anywhere?
Ironically, yes. In the Middle East, the British were fighting the Ottoman Empire. After being humiliated at Gallipoli earlier in the war, 1917 was a turnaround.
This is where T.E. Lawrence comes in. Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes. He was working with Arab rebels. They pulled off this daring attack on the port of Aqaba, coming out of the desert where the Turks didn't expect them. It was a huge strategic win.
And General Allenby takes Jerusalem.
By Christmas 1917, British troops are in Jerusalem. It was a massive morale boost for the British public. But there's a political gamble here, too. The Balfour Declaration.
Right, Arthur Balfour, the foreign secretary, he sends a letter essentially promising a national home for Jewish people in Palestine.
He did. The strategy was to rally support from the Jewish community globally, especially in the U.S. and Russia, for the Allied cause.
But didn't the British also promise that land to the Arabs in exchange for their revolt?
And they had also secretly divided it up with the French in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So you have three conflicting promises for the same piece of land.
That is a gamble with consequences we are literally still living with today.
Absolutely.
Right.
It solved a short-term propaganda problem, but created a century of geopolitical conflict.
It seems like every decision in 1917 was about short-term survival, regardless of the long-term cost.
That's the nature of desperation. When you're drowning, you don't worry about getting wet. You just grab the nearest lifeline.
So let's wrap this up by looking at the scorecard. 1917 ends. The poker chips have been shoved all in. Where do we stand?
It's a strange, terrifying balance. The Allies have lost Russia, a massive blow, but they have gained the United States, an industrial titan.
But the U.S. isn't fully ready yet.
No. And Germany is now effectively a military dictatorship under Hindenburg and Ludendorff. They have silenced the politicians who wanted peace, and they are moving those eastern divisions to the west.
They know the clock is ticking.
They know that by the summer of 1918, there will be 1 million Americans in France. So Germany has to win the war in the spring of 1918. They have one last window.
So the gamble of 1917 didn't end the war. It just set the stage for an even bigger collision.
It raised the stakes to all or nothing. Germany has to knock out Britain and France before the Americans arrive in force. If they fail, they are destroyed. If they succeed, they own Europe.
It's chilling to think how close it was. If the U-boats had been slightly more effective, or if the French army had fully collapsed.
We would be living in a very different world.
Hmm.
1917 proved that history isn't inevitable. It's a series of choices, risks, and gambles. And sometimes the house wins.
A heavy thought to end on. That's our deep dive on 1917, the year of the gamble. Thanks for unpacking it with us.
My pleasure.
We'll catch you in the next one. Take care.